You're listening to a story at Red Lantern Audio. Hope you have a pleasant time listening. If you enjoy it, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe. In my past life, the Crown Prince forced me to marry his disabled younger brother. I refused, even to death. In retaliation, he framed my father for corruption, driving my mother to smash her head against a wall in despair. He had my tendons severed and locked me away in the cold palace, leaving me to freeze to death. When I opened my eyes again, His Majesty, the Emperor, was asking if I was willing to marry Prince Lysander. I bowed my head in sincere gratitude. I am, Your Majesty, wholeheartedly. I was reborn in my 17th year. At that time, Crown Prince Kaelan Chu had just survived a disaster, saved by a mute girl from the countryside. After recovering, he secretly brought her back to the capital and hid her in the East Palace. They fell deeply in love, promising to be properly wed once they overcame every obstacle. And I was the greatest obstacle he needed to remove. In my previous life, my crazed obsession with him forced him to marry me. We were childhood sweethearts, bound by marriage, yet the first thing he did after ascending the throne was to annihilate my entire clan. My father, a man who had served the throne with unwavering loyalty, was branded a corrupt official because of me, his name tarnished even in death. This time, I would prevent that tragedy from ever happening. My 17th birthday banquet was a grand affair. After all, my father was the current prime minister, a former study partner to the emperor himself. My mother hailed from a noble and respected family. My own status surpassed that of even the less favored princesses, so my marriage was a matter of great interest to everyone, including the emperor. After a few cups of wine, he asked me, half joking and half serious, Liora Tong, are you willing to marry Prince Lysander? Prince Lysander Chu was the son of the late empress. A severe illness in his childhood had left his legs devoid of feeling, crippling him. It was precisely because he could not contend for the throne that Kaelan had been able to win the war of succession. If Lysander had been healthy, Kaelan would not have stood a chance. In my past life, I had refused the emperor's offer. He knew of my infatuation with Kaelan and didn't blame me, merely sighing with heavy regret. I only learned later that the one who had proposed this marriage to the emperor was Kaelan himself. He was willing to lose the powerful backing of the prime minister, just to have a legitimate reason to marry that mute girl as his official wife. The emperor's sigh had been for me, a fool who had given her heart to the wrong man. This time, I would not repeat my mistake. I glanced over at Kaelan. A faint smile played on his lips, his sharp, handsome eyes fixed on the mute girl pouring his wine. Her face flushed under his gaze, and she shyly clutched the hem of his robe. The emperor saw my gaze and, before he could let out another sigh, was stunned by my next action. I knelt before him. Your Majesty, I am willing to marry Prince Lysander. The hall fell silent. Everyone was stunned, including Kaelan. The confident smirk of a man who thought he had the world in his hands vanished, his face turning pale with an unreadable anger. The emperor's voice was grave. Liora Tong, do you know what you are saying? I said marry Prince Lysander. My throat tightened. His Majesty truly cared for me. Though he wanted this union, he still hoped I would think it through. My parents, seated nearby, looked as if they wanted to kneel and beg forgiveness on my behalf. Everyone knew how deeply I had once loved Kaelan. I bowed my head to the floor, my voice firm. I am, Your Majesty. Wholeheartedly. With that one sentence, the emperor's expression became unreadable. He finally set down his wine cup, rose, and walked towards me. Liora Tong, I promise you this in this life, Prince Lysander will have you as his only primary wife. A king does not make idle promises. With those words, His Majesty had blocked any retreat for Prince Lysander, completely eliminating any possibility of him taking concubines. All eyes turned to Prince Lysander, filled with a mixture of pity and curiosity. I followed their gazes and, for the first time, truly observed my future husband. He sat in a wheelchair, his skin pale and almost translucent. His shoulders were slightly slumped, and he wore an innocent expression. Imperial father, it's not as if I'm capable of taking concubines anyway. Any other man would have found such a thing difficult to say, yet Prince Lysander spoke with such ease that I couldn't help but see him in a new light. The banquet continued. Urged by those around me, I had no choice but to take a seat beside him. He poured me a cup of warm milk, his voice gentle. I apologize for putting you in this difficult position. The milk was sweet, surprisingly to my taste. I cast a taunting smile in Kaelan's direction. It's fine. At least it's better than marrying the crown prince. Behind Kaelan, the mute girl, Seraphina, stared at me with cold, resentful eyes. She was the same in my last life. In front of Kaelan, she was fragile and delicate. In front of me, she was vicious and cruel. I could never forget the sight of her smothering my newborn baby in its swaddling clothes. then feigning despair to the point of suicide. To comfort her, Kalen personally ordered his men to sever my tendons. He allowed the palace servants to steal my last blanket in the dead of winter. As I froze to death, I could only think one thing: if I had another chance, I would drag that wretched pair down to hell with me. I drank a few more cups than I should have and stumbled back to my courtyard. It was quiet, with not a single maid in sight. I had to light the candle myself. The flickering flame illuminated Kalen's sharp features. He was sitting on a long bench, draped in a gray cloak, his slender fingers gliding over the strings of a guqin. Kalen was a master of music, and this instrument was one I had spent a great deal of effort to find as a gift for him. Laura, come here. His fingers moved, producing a melodic tune. I stood my ground. Your Highness, you should return to the East Palace. Why did you agree? He set the instrument aside and approached me, just as he used to. His fingers tilted my chin up as if toying with a pet. Why did you agree to marry Lysander? Are you angry because of Seraphina? I was genuinely dizzy. To awaken from the nightmare of my past life, only to face him at such a close distance, was draining my strength. The moment his fingers reached for me, I felt an almost primal urge to bite them off. I fought to suppress my emotions, recoiling from his touch. The window was open, and a cold night breeze swept in, the chill on my skin reminding me of my final moments in the cold palace. I clenched my fists, the pain of my nails digging into my palms helping me restrain the surging hatred in my chest. Lowering my head, I said in a mocking tone, "Isn't this what you wanted?" Kalen froze. I looked up, my eyes filled with the same passionate, all-consuming love as before. Anything you desire, I will do it for you. Whether it is my happiness or my life. Kalen was so startled he nearly fled. He was brilliant in all matters, except for affairs of the heart, where he was a complete fool. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so easily manipulated by a mute woman. Perhaps because his own mother, the imperial consort, was so domineering, he was particularly drawn to women who appeared weak yet stubborn. This was a lesson I had learned from Seraphina Chen. That mute woman was indeed very effective. The wedding between myself and Prince Lysander was set for 6 months later, causing quite a stir in the capital. I waited quietly in my chambers, ignoring all invitations until the East Palace hosted a banquet for the Crown Prince's coming-of-age ceremony. In my past life, I had spent half a year preparing for his ceremony, exhausting myself to find a rare guqin for him, the very one he had just played in my room. That instrument was named Tender Feelings. Later, he gave it to Seraphina. She removed all its strings and stuck them in a small vase as decoration. It was just like my love for him, broken string by string. She was just a mute girl from the countryside, ignorant of music, but she knew exactly how to manipulate Kalen's heart. I had painstakingly learned to play for him, yet in his eyes, my efforts were worth nothing. On the day of the ceremony, I carefully cleaned every string of the instrument before putting it away. I deliberately chose a lavender silk gown for the occasion. After presenting my official gift, I retreated to an inner hall with a few other noble ladies to rest. The room was filled with the faint scent of mint. My goodness! One of the ladies exclaimed as I took off my cloak. Your dress, it's identical to Miss Chen's. How can that be? I feigned surprise. This was a gift from the imperial consort herself. A flicker of triumph flashed in Seraphina's eyes. She shook her head slightly and continued warming her hands over a brazier. Perhaps because I had frozen to death in my past life, I was now exceptionally sensitive to the cold. Whenever winter came, I would spend hours by the fire, so much so that the maids in my residence would compete to serve in my courtyard, just to share a bit of the warmth. Miss Chen, where did you get that dress? Another lady asked. Seraphina looked flustered and wrote on a piece of paper. I don't know, she wrote, before adding, His Highness gave it to me. As soon as those words were written, the chatter in the room quieted. Seraphina, at a loss, looked to her maid for help. The maid glanced around before one of the young ladies finally spoke up. Miss Chen, what is your relationship with the Crown Prince? The maid brought a plate of pastries, signaling for Seraphina to be careful with her answer, but she was clearly panicking, her eyes darting towards me. I silently mouthed a single word to her. She glared at me, then furiously picked up her brush and wrote, His Highness said he will marry me. Before she could finish, the room fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. The lady who had asked the question leaned in to whisper with the others. Though their voices were low, Seraphina heard every word. They were calling her the exact same thing I had just mouthed. Shameless. Seraphina's face turned crimson, her eyes welling with tears. She looked utterly pitiful. When Kalen walked in, a single tear rolled down her cheek at the perfect moment. She followed behind him, her head bowed. Kaelin, not knowing what had happened, instinctively waited for me to explain. I bit my lip. I remained silent, looking just as aggrieved as Seraphina, if not more so. A more outspoken young lady spoke up sarcastically. Your Highness, if you already have someone in your heart, you should have just said you weren't interested in any of us. Why humiliate us like this? If the position of Crown Princess is already taken, then we won't impose any longer. She turned to leave, and the other ladies quickly followed suit. Kaelin's face darkened, still not grasping the situation. He instinctively reached out to stop me. What happened? Before I could speak, the same young lady pulled me back. Your Highness, she said coolly, the imperial consort cherishes Leora. The gifts she bestows upon her are naturally one of kind. Yet even a gift from her can be shared with Miss Chen. Such deep affection is truly admirable. As Seraphina and I stood side by side, Kaelin finally noticed that our dresses were identical. But I didn't give him a chance to speak. My voice trembled. I thought at least this dress was something I could have for myself. The imperial consort treated me as the future crown princess on the surface, but in reality, she only wanted to use me to control my father, the prime minister. She had given me countless gifts, but rarely anything truly priceless or unique. This dress was no exception. It could be custom, ordered from any major tailor in the city. I had deliberately dug it out from the bottom of my chest to stir up trouble without saying a word. In my past life, when I saw Seraphina wearing this dress, I demanded she apologize. But Kaelin didn't even remember it was a gift from his mother. He only saw me as arrogant and unreasonable, which made him pity the delicate flower. Seraphina even more. So this time, I intentionally wore the same dress. He couldn't feign ignorance now. I was about to become Prince Lysander's wife. Without the support of the Prime Minister's residence, the imperial consort naturally needed to find another powerful family to ally with. For this coming-of-age ceremony, she had invited all the most prominent noble ladies in the capital. But in the end, I was the one who benefited. Thanks to Seraphina's little drama, everyone now knew that Kaelin favored a mute girl from the countryside. He would even cast aside the Prime Minister's daughter for her. So why would any of these other proud young women be willing to play second fiddle? They were the daughters of prestigious families. Having to share a husband with a mute commoner was humiliating enough, let alone the possibility of being overshadowed by her. The coming-of-age ceremony ended in a cloud of awkwardness. Kaelin couldn't understand how gifting his beloved a dress could cause such a disaster. Soon, both the emperor and the imperial consort learned of the mute girl's existence. Kaelin understood that a tall tree catches the wind. Being too prominent would only bring trouble for a vulnerable woman like her. That was why, in his previous life, he had kept her hidden so well that even I had never truly seen her as a threat. That night, the emperor summoned Kaelin to the palace. According to the servants, His Majesty shattered 3 teacups. I guess the emperor wanted him to deal with the mute girl quickly, and Kaelin's refusal had sent him into a rage. An emperor could be sentimental, even whimsical, but a crown prince could not. After being reprimanded, Kaelin snuck into the back garden of the Prime Minister's residence. We were childhood friends, and with his high status, no one dared to stop him. Why is this Gukin still here? He found me tuning the instrument. I answered flatly, where else would it be? He seemed to remember something. You haven't given me my gift this year, he said with certainty. Yes, I have, I replied calmly. It was with the gifts from the other ladies. This year, I had given him a set of the 4 treasures of the study. Valuable, but thoughtless. In previous years, I had always given him a separate, secret gift, afraid he would confuse mine with others. In truth, the Gukin was the gift I had prepared for this year. Kaelin sensed my coldness and frowned slightly. Are you still upset? I told you, that dress wasn't a gift from my mother. I suddenly realized how incredibly impatient he was. How had I never noticed that before? In that case, Your Highness, why don't you take me on the autumn hunt? I changed the subject, masking my sullen mood. If I remembered correctly, during that year's autumn hunt, a fire had broken out. Seraphina had been gravely injured while saving Kaelin. After being treated by the imperial physicians, she had miraculously regained her ability to speak. After all this commotion, the other young ladies must be upset. This is a perfect opportunity for them to witness your heroic prowess firsthand. Kaelin's expression softened. But these are all potential consorts my mother chose for me. Does that not bother you? I looked up at him, my gaze firm. I've told you before. For you, Your Highness, I would do anything. As for Miss Chen, she is kind-hearted and the one you love. You will need a primary wife who won't bully her. Kaelin fell silent. He had just been scolded by both the emperor and the imperial consort, and had temporarily set aside his plan to make Seraphina his primary wife. My words gave him the perfect excuse. "You're truly not bothered?" he asked again. My voice caught, and I fought back tears, shaking my head. "Not at all. I only need you to remember me." Callan pulled me into an embrace. I rested my head on his shoulder, my eyes filled with a coldness that made me want to retch. It took a great deal of persuasion, with me speaking on Callan's behalf, before the other young ladies reluctantly agreed to join the autumn hunt. They had always been close to me, and now they looked at me with a mix of pity and frustration, as if I were a lost cause. Before we set out, the Emperor's gaze swept coolly over Seraphina. Callan immediately moved to shield her behind him. I watched closely and noticed she was thinner than before. I wondered what new trick she was playing. I had intended to travel with the other ladies, but Prince Lysander, despite his inconvenient legs, was also joining the hunt. I had no choice but to accompany him to assist. Along the way he leaned almost his entire weight on me, grinning. "My apologies for the trouble, Leora." I ground my teeth. "Your Highness, you're quite heavy." Up ahead, Callan and a few other princes rode on horseback, their figures heroic as they drew their bows and loosed their arrows, felling their prey with clean, decisive shots. Pushing Prince Lysander's wheelchair, I noticed his lips curve downward in a subtle expression of loss. An idea sparked in my mind. "Want to try?" I offered him my bow and arrow. He took it, looking startled. "I'm a very fast runner," I assured him. "Pushing you won't slow me down." In my past life, I had secretly trained with a master in the army barracks, just to have more to talk about with Callan. Running fast was no challenge. A corner of Prince Lysander's mouth lifted, a look of interest in his eyes. We didn't dare venture too deep into the woods, staying near the edge. It wasn't long before Callan chased a fox in our direction. Lysander immediately drew the bow. The arrow pierced the fox's front leg. It limped towards me and collapsed at my feet. Looking into its wide, round eyes, I felt a pang of pity. "It's bowing to you," Lysander teased. I couldn't resist stroking its head. "If you like it, you can keep it." Just as I was about to reply, another arrow suddenly flew past us. Lysander quickly grabbed the fox, pulling it from my lap. The arrow embedded itself deep into a tree trunk right next to me. "His legs may be useless, but his arm strength isn't bad," Callan said, his voice laced with ice. The sudden attack startled me. For a horrifying moment, I saw a flash of splattering blood from the dungeons in my past life. I trembled uncontrollably. Lysander gripped my wrist, his firm hold forcing me to calm down. Callan dismounted and strode towards me. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, he was getting closer. I started muttering, my voice so low I could barely hear it myself. Lysander leaned in to listen, his brow furrowed for a moment before smoothing out again. "I will help you," he whispered back. I looked at him in shock, trying to confirm if he had truly heard what I said, or if I had truly heard what he said. "Leora, you like foxes?" Callan asked. The mute girl beside him pressed closer against him. A cold breeze wafted past, and I caught a strange, fleeting scent. It wasn't sandalwood, but something more like a special kind of incense. I glanced at Seraphina. She smiled at me, a smile that was somehow terrifying. Just then, chaos erupted. A cheetah burst out from deep within the forest. The Imperial guards shouted, "Protect their highnesses." They tried to rush forward, but it was too late. The cheetah lunged straight for Callan, or more accurately, for Seraphina hiding behind him. At that moment, Callan was unarmed. Fighting a cheetah with his bare hands was impossible. He grabbed Seraphina and rolled across the ground, narrowly dodging the attack. Then, he looked back at me in a panic. Lysander remained as still as a mountain. He pulled me behind his wheelchair, drew his bow, and aimed at the cheetah. My heart sank. The bow in his hands was a custom one I had ordered for him. It was lighter than a standard bow, but also far less powerful. It couldn't even kill a fox instantly, let alone a ferocious cheetah. Whoosh! The arrow sliced through the air. The cheetah collapsed, fresh blood spraying out and staining the hem of my gown. But this time, I felt no fear. Instead, I felt a strange sense of exhilaration. Lysander took off his cloak and draped it over my shoulders. He leaned close to my ear, his voice low but heavy, like a solemn vow. "I will help you kill him." Lysander, with a single arrow, had killed the cheetah. The Emperor was overjoyed and generously rewarded everyone present, everyone except Callan. They had all clearly seen that in a moment of life and death, the Crown Prince had disregarded his own brother and his childhood friend, clinging only to the mute girl as he fled. That night, Callan knelt outside the Imperial study. Servants moved in and out, but all held their breath, daring not to make a sound. The Emperor gifted me a gown embroidered with a peacock pattern. The needlework was exquisite, each feather so lifelike it seemed to breathe. When I received the reward, I happened to be standing right next to Callan. The chief eunuch's sharp voice announced the decree slowly. His Majesty proclaims that this gown is the only one of its kind in the world. Anyone found wearing a similar garment shall be punished for defying the Emperor. His Majesty was avenging me. A simple dress randomly bestowed by the imperial consort had not only humiliated Kaelin, but was now being replaced by a unique imperial gift. It was an overwhelming display of favor, proving that even an emperor was swayed by a well-timed tear. Kaelin knelt on the cold stone tiles, his back ramrod straight. Though he was being punished, his eyes, when they looked at me, were filled with a pained expression. I was reminded of the old days. No matter how wronged I was, in his eyes, I was always the one being unreasonable, the one who would never be satisfied. But Seraphina, in his eyes, she was always pure, gentle, and understanding. If he loved a gentle and understanding flower so much, then I would make that flower wither right before his eyes. I respectfully accepted the Emperor's gift, kowtowed in thanks, and turned to leave without a single glance at Kaelin. But his gaze never left my back, just as I had once relentlessly chased after his. That evening, the noble ladies flocked to my chambers, chattering and warming themselves by the fire while admiring the peacock gown. It's truly magnificent. Look at this needlework. I doubt there's anything else like it in the world. Compared to the one the imperial consort gave you, this is infinitely more splendid. I instructed my maid to prepare tea. As she left, I noticed a shadow by the door and deliberately remarked with a faint smile. His Majesty specifically said this gown is one of a kind. Not something any imitation can compare to. The shadow outside stiffened. The crown prince is truly ridiculous, one of the ladies scoffed. Does he really think that mute woman is his official princess? From the coming-of-age ceremony to the autumn hunt, he brought her everywhere. Even at the most critical moment, he only cared about protecting her. Another young lady gently took my hand. You must not be foolish again. I looked around at the ladies in the room. They were all proud and spirited, women I had often clashed with in the past. They understood better than anyone that they could be used as political pawns by their families, sent off in arranged marriages. They had no faith in love, but they had admired my stubborn devotion to Kaelin. They could not accept a mute woman of unknown origin like Seraphina, who was like a climbing vine clinging to Kaelin to survive. At this moment, they felt a sense of solidarity with me. Though we were once rivals for the position of crown princess, our competition never stooped to such low tactics, because it wasn't worth it. Seraphina was a different kind of opponent entirely. Too weak, too deceitful. I could see through her, but I couldn't defeat her. In my last life, I had lost miserably. I squeezed the hand holding mine. Don't worry, I said softly. I won't. I can't be a fool twice. She looked startled, as did the other ladies. I had always kept my distance from them, my entire world revolving around Kaelin. I never actively sought their friendship. Now that I was extending an olive branch, they were naturally pleased. Whether for personal gain or private grudges, befriending me was no bad thing. The tea is ready. My maid, Lyra, announced as she entered with a tray, giving me a slight nod. I personally poured tea for each of them. We sat and talked for a long time. As our spirits rose, we even brought out a flask of warmed wine, drinking late into the night before they finally departed. Lyra helped me wash up and change for bed. No one knew that the woman who was supposed to be in the East Palace was silently sneaking into my courtyard. My maid, Aria, shook me awake. Miss, you must run. Our courtyard is on fire. Her words jolted me from my sleepy haze. A single sentence brought me back to reality. In my past life, during this same autumn hunt, a fire had broken out in the East Palace. Seraphina, the frail mute girl, had carried the unconscious crown prince out of the inferno. She was so severely injured that she nearly died. After that incident, her path to favor in the royal family was wide open, and Kaelin's love for her became unshakable. Seeing me still dazed, Aria grabbed a cloak, threw it over me, and carried me out of the room. We had just made it to the courtyard when I suddenly remembered something. I pushed her away and ran back into the burning building. Aria screamed in terror. I had almost forgotten. The gown gifted by the Emperor was still inside. Under the flickering firelight, the peacock embroidery on the gown looked mesmerizingly beautiful. I picked up a burning piece of wood and threw it directly onto the intricate pattern. The moment the spark touched the fabric, the flames roared to life, consuming half of the skirt in an instant. I grabbed a prepared bag of sand and quickly smothered the remaining fire. Then, I clutched the gown and ran outside. Just as the flames licked at the hem of my own dress, an imperial guard rushed in. My apologies, he said in a low voice. He wrapped an arm around my waist and, with a swift movement, carried me out of the inferno. He was just as Lyra had said. His lightness skill was truly remarkable. The fire had alerted the emperor. He stood in the cold night wind, only letting out a sigh of relief when he saw me emerge safely. Seraphina clutched Kaelin's sleeve, her face as white as a sheet. I gave her a cool glance, and she trembled even more violently. I grinned, striding forward as if showing off a treasure. "Your Majesty," I said, smiling at the emperor. "I've brought out the gown you bestowed upon me." The hem of the peacock gown was charred black, and my own clothes were burned in several places. But anyone could see how desperately I had worked to save it. The emperor stared at me for a long moment before finally speaking. "It is just a gown. How could it be more important than your life?" "It's different," I insisted stubbornly, slowly stroking the damaged hem. "This is a gift from your Majesty. There is only one in the entire world. It's a shame, I was still a step too late." Kaelin looked at me with a complex expression. My fiancé's gaze, however, was much more direct, filled only with worry and heartache. I turned my head, unable to bear his concern and unwilling to deceive him. "Your Majesty." A eunuch on duty knelt and reported respectfully. "Before the fire started, this servant saw Miss Chen in Lady Tong's courtyard." I silently exchanged a look with Lyra. She shook her head slightly, indicating this wasn't her doing. The chief eunuch roared, "Insolent! Why didn't you report it immediately?" The young eunuch trembled. "Miss Chen was only wandering outside the room, she never went inside." Just as Seraphina was about to explain, Kaelin's voice cut in. "Imperial father, Seraphina." "Silence." The emperor barked, cutting him off. Kaelin wrapped his arm around Seraphina's shoulder, a protective gesture that was utterly foolish. Then, more people came forward, testifying that they had seen Seraphina acting suspiciously in various places. Previously, out of fear of the crown prince, no one had dared to speak up. But when their accounts were pieced together, her actions clearly laid out a plan to commit arson. Terrified, Seraphina dropped to her knees, clutching Kaelin's arm and shaking her head frantically. She looked exquisitely weak and pitiful. Kaelin, anxious to defend her, pushed the problem onto me. "Leora, you said Seraphina was kind and pure. You believe her, don't you?" I pretended to hesitate. Then, as he wished, I looked at Seraphina and asked slowly, "Miss Chen, just tell me where you were when the fire started, and I will believe you." The emperor frowned in disapproval. Kaelin's eyes, however, filled with gratitude. I looked back at him, my own eyes red, rimmed and brimming with an inconsolable sorrow. He turned his head away, unable to meet my gaze. A servant brought a brush and paper. Seraphina's hand trembled as she picked up the brush. But in the end, she couldn't write a single word. "Seraphina," Kaelin prompted in a low voice, his eyes full of worry. I let out a cold laugh. Of course she wouldn't dare to write anything. Because at that moment, she was in the East Palace, setting a fire of her own. What she never expected was that the fire would spread to my courtyard. She craved an opportunity to miraculously regain her voice, while earning a reputation for sacrificing herself to save the crown prince. According to her plan, this was supposed to be her triumphant comeback. She never imagined I would turn her scheme against her, cornering her completely. I stared coldly at the palm of her hand. "Miss Chen, why does your hand smell of lamp oil?" I suddenly grabbed her wrist. "Yura." Kaelin felt I was being too aggressive, his eyes flashing with displeasure. He thought I was still the same Leora as before, the one person he couldn't lose, but also the one person he never needed to coax, because I was always afraid of making him angry. Too bad for him, this was the final act between us. "Tell me," I roared, my voice suddenly sharp. "Why is there lamp oil on your hand? You were the one who burned my peacock gown." I exploded with fury, seizing the collar of Seraphina's robes. She choked and coughed, her body trembling. Kaelin immediately shielded her, shoving me so hard I fell to the ground. It was a purely instinctual reaction. After he did it, he froze, a look of panic on his face. He reached out to help me up, but I slapped his hand away. "Your Highness," she was the one who set the fire. Lyra helped me to my feet. I was drained of all strength, leaning heavily against her. "Even so, you still want to protect her." Kaelin was furious. He didn't want to lose me, his devoted pawn, but he also couldn't bear to see his delicate flower get hurt. "Crown Prince," the Emperor prompted, his voice stern. He also wanted an answer. After a moment of silence, Kaelin knelt. "This son believes Seraphina." I buried my face in Lyra's shoulder, my body shaking slightly. Perfect. This was it. Kaelin and I were completely finished. The performance had left my throat raw. I was now lying in bed, continuing to play the part of a heartbroken lover driven to despair. Lysander gently closed the curtain, turning away a young lady who had come to visit. "Eat less osmanthus cake," he said, snatching the half-eaten piece from my hand and calmly enjoying it himself. As expected of a prince personally tutored by the emperor. Even the act of stealing a cake was done with an uncanny elegance. I glared at him. How rude. Lysander handed me a hand warmer, his voice laced with amusement. Do you want the entire residence to see Lady Tong fainting from sorrow and crying her eyes out, only to have visibly gained weight in a matter of hours? I gasped and touched my chin. Thankfully, it was still slender. Lysander chuckled. He was clearly teasing me. The relationship between us was strange. To the outside world, Prince Lysander was infatuated with me, willing to silently wait by my side, even though he knew I couldn't forget my past with the Crown Prince. But in my eyes, we were clearly not that close, yet he seemed to see through my every thought. He not only tolerated my actions without limit, but also secretly helped me clean up the messes, from arranging for the eunuch to present the evidence against Serafina, to now playing along with my charade. I didn't understand what value I held for him to use. Everything he did seemed purely for my benefit. Or could it be that he had actually fallen for me? Lysander met my gaze and raised an eyebrow. What is it? Can't wait to marry into my residence. I shook my head and asked softly. I was just wondering why you're helping me. He paused, a nostalgic look on his face. When I first lost the use of my legs, I couldn't accept it. I wreaked havoc in the palace every day, refusing to eat, smashing everything. One day, you wandered into my palace by accident. You just pulled me aside and started chattering on and on. He smiled, the curve of his lips deepening. You were only about 7 or 8 years old then. You talked so much that I was annoyed into submission, and had to eat my meal. I had no memory of this at all. But it wasn't surprising that I might have gotten lost in the palace. I was probably chasing after Kalen, only to be intentionally abandoned by him. Just for that, Lysander nodded. At that time, my entire palace was shrouded in a deathly silence, like cold ash. Only you were so full of life, so vibrant. But I was worried. I couldn't say it directly. After all, plotting against the Crown Prince was tantamount to treason. Was a little warmth I had offered in childhood really worth him going this far? Lysander looked at me gently, his gaze so intense it felt like a weight on my chest. He spoke slowly. I have been sickly since childhood. My legs were crippled by the imperial consort. So, Leora, you can trust me completely. Helping you is helping myself. From behind me, the little fox I had rescued lazily stretched and patted over. Its wound had healed. It quickly snatched the remaining osmanthus cake. I stroked its head, my eyes unconsciously drawn to Lysander's legs, which were covered by a blanket. I had once seen a paralyzed relative of mine. His legs were as thin and withered as dead branches. Was Lysander the same? Perhaps my pity was too obvious. Lysander's lips curved, and he reached out to pat my head, the same way I had just petted the fox. The arson incident at the autumn hunt was finally concluded. Serafina was punished by being forbidden from using a sedan chair for the journey back. Kalen walked beside her, supporting her every step. The young ladies who came to visit me all sneered at the mention of it. Kalen thought he was being a devoted lover. But he never realized that this act completely severed his chances of marrying any daughter from a prominent noble family. This was exactly why I had dragged them into this mess. Rumors were no match for seeing things with their own eyes. The emperor didn't suppress the news, so it quickly spread from the court to the common folk. The crown prince had openly defied his majesty for a woman. The imperial consort summoned me to the palace, claiming she wanted to discuss important matters, but each time, she only vaguely hinted that I should beg the prime minister's residence to help Kalen. I used the excuse of being ill and ignored the matrons she sent. After being turned away several times, they finally gave up. She then bypassed Kalen and went straight for Serafina. I heard that as soon as Serafina returned to the East Palace, she fell into a high fever that wouldn't break. She was plagued by nightmares every night. No one from the Imperial Medical Academy dared to defy the Emperor's will and treat her. Kalen had to summon physicians from outside the palace, but to no avail. Finally, he had no choice but to send me a letter, begging for my help. I burned it without even reading it. After waiting for days with no reply, he came to my residence himself. This time, I was prepared. I had guards posted at all the side entrances with orders not to let the crown prince in. My father received him in the main hall. He already doted on me, and after Lyra added her own dramatic account of the crown prince's heartlessness, my father was so enraged he nearly threw Kalen out. The only reason Kalen was still sitting there drinking tea was out of respect for the bigger picture. He had finished half a pot of tea by the time I slowly made my appearance. His purpose was simple. He wanted me to plead with the emperor to send an imperial physician to treat Serafina. Upon hearing this, my father nearly ordered him out on the spot. I smiled faintly, my voice soft. Your Highness, I'm afraid I cannot. Kalen slammed his hand on the table, struggling to contain his anger. Lyora, stop this nonsense. I can promise you that I will not make Seraphina the crown princess. I almost laughed out loud. Even at this point, he still thought I was just acting out of jealousy, that all he had to do was give me an out, and I would obediently fall in line. And a promise not to make Seraphina the crown princess. Did he really think he would hold the title of crown prince for much longer? Your Highness, I am to be married soon. To avoid gossip, it is best that we do not see each other again. Laura. Kaelin stood up abruptly, blocking my path. Think carefully. Are you really not going to save Seraphina? I narrowed my eyes, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Your Highness, are you certain she is merely ill? Lysander had told me that he too had suffered a severe illness in his youth, with symptoms identical to Seraphina's. Kaelin's face instantly turned cold. It seemed he wasn't entirely ignorant of the fact that the imperial consort had poisoned Lysander, crippling him. Well then, what happened next had nothing to do with me. I wondered who was more ruthless, the imperial consort, or the deeply in love crown prince. A few days later, Lyra brought news that Seraphina had recovered. Not only had she recovered, but through this ordeal, she had miraculously regained her voice. I looked out the window. A pigeon from Prince Lysander's residence flew over and landed on the windowsill. Lysander was sitting under the eaves, teasing the little fox. I smiled faintly and turned to Lyra. Spread the news. I was never good at insidious plots. Even with a second chance, I could only mimic the tricks Seraphina had used in our past life. For instance, she had once arranged for a monk to spread a rumor that our fates clashed, forcing Kaelin to move out of my palace. This time, I would use a rumor to gift her a lifetime of prosperity. A story began to circulate throughout the capital. Seraphina possessed the phoenix fate. Her destiny was even greater than that of the true dragon. Years ago, Prince Lysander had suffered a grave illness. Though he survived, he lost the use of his legs. Seraphina had suffered the exact same symptoms, yet not only was she unharmed, she had even been cured of her muteness. As the rumor grew, it eventually reached the palace. The imperial consort immediately summoned me. This time, I did not refuse. I deliberately wore a fox, fur cloak recently gifted to me by the emperor, which caused her own pet fox to bare its teeth at me incessantly. Laura, I have always thought of you as the crown princess, the imperial consort said, gently stroking her blood-red nails. She looked like a demoness from a folktale. I didn't reply. She chuckled, but her eyes were as cold as ice. It's a pity the crown prince is so stubborn. She said it was a pity, but her eyes were full of calculation. There was never any destiny between the crown prince and me. She likely didn't believe I had truly let go, fearing I would suddenly stand in her way again. It seemed the rumor of the phoenix fate had captured her interest. In that case, I would give her another push. Your Grace, there is something I don't know if I should say. Her interest was piqued. Speak. I feigned hesitation. Actually, I have not yet forgotten His Highness, the Crown Prince. If your Grace is willing to help, please ask His Majesty to retract the marriage decree. The imperial consort was taken aback, clearly not expecting this. You mean, you still want to be the crown princess? I looked at her innocently. Isn't that right? Your Grace has always been fond of me. Such a small request, Leora, she warned, her voice sharp. Do not be delusional. Kaelin is the crown prince. Seraphina has the phoenix fate. They will be married in the future. Seraphina is the crown princess, the future empress. Ah, I blinked, my voice catching. But your Grace just said you had chosen me. She sighed, her tone exasperated. I had hoped you would still be useful to me after marrying Prince Lysander. I never thought you would be so foolish. Matron, bring my jade pendant and bestow it upon Seraphina. She is the crown princess I have chosen. Let no one else entertain any foolish notions. I was dismissed from the imperial consort's chambers. Just as I left, Prince Lysander was coming from the council hall and offered to escort me back. As the imperial consort that impatient, she even gave away her personal jade pendant. Is she afraid I'll lose my mind? Lysander took my hand. His fingertips were warm against my cold skin. Laura, you don't need to do this for me. No, I said softly, pulling my hand away. Other than him, no one had ever treated me so well. I wanted everyone to know who was responsible for what had happened to him. The matter of the imperial consort bestowing the jade pendant was meant to be a private affair, but I had already sent a maid ahead to secretly inform Seraphina. Overjoyed and reckless, she led a retinue of maids straight to the imperial consort's palace to kowtow in thanks. And so, the entire capital learned that the crown prince was going to marry Seraphina, the woman with the phoenix fate. The most amusing part was that Kaelin was the last to find out. The emperor sent the chief eunuch, she to deliver a decree. He officially named me a princess, ordering that my dowry be prepared according to the standards of a first-rank princess. At the same time, he awarded Prince Lysander 7 pearls, making him the first prince in the dynasty to receive the 7-pearl seal, a status nearly equal to that of the crown prince. The entire imperial court was shaken. Everyone understood the emperor was furious. The more he favored me and Lysander, the greater his disappointment in the imperial consort and the crown prince. The emperor was known for his benevolence, but he was still a monarch. While he was still on the throne, the imperial consort was already rushing to have the crown prince marry a woman with the phoenix fate. What was the meaning of this? Was she trying to force his abdication? If the imperial consort had stopped to think for just a moment, she would have realized how foolish this move was. But I didn't give her that time. The emperor and the late empress had shared a deep and loving bond. After her death, he left the position of empress vacant, never intending to promote the imperial consort. She had waited too long. Her family lacked sufficient power, which was why she had always tried to curry favor with me. Now, with the sudden appearance of a woman with the phoenix fate, she naturally clung to her for dear life. Serafina, too, needed an opportunity to legitimize her status. So, she naively presented the imperial consort's private jade pendant at the ancestral altar in front of all the court officials and kowtowed in thanks. The act caused such a commotion that the entire world knew. The emperor ordered an investigation into the source of the rumor. It wasn't long before they traced it to a retired imperial physician. The old physician claimed that his ancestors had once treated Prince Lysander, and had left behind a detailed medical journal. When he examined Serafina, he discovered her symptoms perfectly matched the records. In his youth, he had traveled widely as a physician and had encountered this condition before. A high fever that wouldn't subside, accompanied by terrifying nightmares. The locals called it phoenix goo. Therefore, he hadn't intentionally spread the rumor, he had merely mentioned his diagnosis, and someone else had taken advantage of it, leading to the story of the phoenix fate. The emperor was enraged. Lysander was the child he had raised himself, the son of his beloved late empress. He was the legitimate heir, yet he had been poisoned with a goo parasite, right under the emperor's nose. His Majesty immediately dispatched his secret guards to investigate. They found the phoenix goo hidden under the pillow of the matron, who had served the imperial consort for many years. The emperor instantly ordered her execution. This was supposed to be a palace secret, but when Lysander came to see me, he recounted it as if it were an amusing story. It seemed he had eyes and ears everywhere. If it weren't for that wretched poison that had stolen his legs, he was truly more suited to be crown prince than Kaelin. Don't be sad, I comforted him. Lysander gently placed a piece of sweet and sour pork on my plate. What is fated will be. What is not cannot be forced. Besides, the one thing I want most in this life, I already have. He leaned against the armrest of his wheelchair, and a pang of sorrow shot through my heart. If only I could have been reborn a little sooner. With the crown prince under house arrest, my father grew anxious and secretly asked if I knew what was happening. I told him everything. My father could only sigh. The imperial consort's downfall was complete. She had poisoned Serafina, causing the crown prince to fight fiercely for her, only to obtain the antidote. Then, over a single jade pendant, she caused the crown prince to lose the emperor's favor. Now, she was implicated in the crippling of Prince Lysander. To protect Kaelin, she swore he knew nothing about it. Out of consideration for their years as husband and wife, the emperor did not strip her of her title, but he confined her to the cold palace. The very same place where I had been imprisoned in my last life, a cold, desolate place of forgotten souls. I quietly sent someone to deliver her a thick blanket. The emperor tacitly allowed my action, which only increased his favor towards me. He despised the imperial consort, but saw me as someone who valued loyalty and kindness, and he rewarded me with another bolt of the finest brocade. The next time I saw Kaelin was at the Minister of Right's residence. The minister's daughter was getting married and had personally invited me. Kaelin was to be engaged to that same young lady. It was an imperial decree set in stone. When I saw him this time, he was much thinner. His gaze on me was a complex mix of regret and a burning, possessive longing. It was the same fiery look I had once given him, and it made my skin crawl. Leora, it's been a while. I gave a slight nod in greeting. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and pulled me behind a rockery. I struggled, but he held firm, his voice low. In our past life, did you really freeze to death? I couldn't hide the raw hatred that flooded my eyes. He met my furious gaze, and a cold, cruel smile touched his lips. Kaelin had been reborn. This meant that every advantage, every piece of knowledge I had held in this life, was gone in an instant. He had lived longer than I had. He knew more. My world tilted. Kaelin stepped forward to steady me, lifting my chin. Leora, I know you hate me. Give me another chance. This time I swear, you will be my only empress. It was disgusting. Not just disgusting, but terrifying. He was exactly the same as in our past life. I don't believe you, Kalen, I said, pushing him away and taking a step back, trying to steady my breathing. He just smiled, a leisurely, confident expression that was completely different from his previous immaturity. The man before me now had an oppressive aura, no less intimidating than the Emperor's. He ignored my rejection. Actually, he said slowly, I've discovered that the one who loves me most is still you. After you died in our last life, I was miserable for a long time. Leora, no matter what, I won't let you go this time. He tried to entice me, step by step. Imperial Father is not well. As soon as I ascend the throne, I will immediately make you my empress. And your dreams. My wedding to Prince Lysander is in a little over a month. Even if you became emperor, you'd have to wait at least 3 or 4 years. Ooh, said Imperial Father, can last another 3 or 4 years. Kalen said nonchalantly. I froze. You're insane. He smirked. Matron Wei had 3 vials of Phoenix Goo in total. 1 crippled Lysander. 1 harmed Seraphina. What about the 3rd? I had heard the Emperor was ill, but his symptoms were completely different. His Majesty just has a cold. Kalen shrugged. If you don't believe me, you can go to the palace and see for yourself. His casual demeanor terrified me even more. Leora, it was only after you died that I realized my feelings for Seraphina were just gratitude. What I feel for you, that is true love. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. Since you've told me a secret, I'll tell you one. In our last life, the child in Seraphina's womb was not yours. That's why she could so ruthlessly smother the baby and frame me for it. Because that child was the bastard spawn of her affair. To my surprise, Kylan showed no shock. I know, he said calmly. I personally watched her drink the contraceptive tea every single time. How could the future heir be born from the womb of a village girl? He knew, he had known all along. He knew, and he still ordered my tendons to be severed. He knew, and he still locked me in the cold palace to freeze to death. What kind of demon had I loved in my past life? He saw the thoughts in my head, his tone exasperated, as if I were the unreasonable one. I had no choice, he said softly. Lysander had an imperial will. I needed a legitimate reason to get rid of him. And who told him to be so fond of you? Just knowing you were in danger, he was willing to leave a will to save you. A pity he was still a step too late. You were already so. I took the opportunity to have him imprisoned for life. I heard he spent the rest of his days chanting scriptures for you. Until his very last breath, his lips were still moving, reciting prayers. A cripple, yet so devoted. I looked coldly at the man before me. Through his eyes, I saw the Prince Lysander of my past life. He had shaved his head and buried himself in a quiet monastery. In the tranquil meditation hall, rows of lanterns hung from the rafters, each one bearing my name, praying for a peaceful next life for me. Kylan and the daughter of the Minister of Rites were soon married. She was a bold and spirited woman. We had once shared tea and drank together during the autumn hunt. But on her wedding day, there wasn't a trace of joy on her face. It was as if she weren't marrying into the East Palace, but walking straight into her own tomb. I felt gravely ill. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. My body was consumed by a profound sense of unease. Lysander sat by my bedside every day. In my delirium, I would often mistake him for Kalen and lunge at his throat. He would just silently take my hands, gently prying my fingers open one by one, then place my hands back on his lap. In the palace, the Emperor's illness worsened. The Imperial Medical Academy worked around the clock. My father sought help everywhere, but no one dared to defy the Crown Prince's implicit orders. In the end, he could only find the physician who had first diagnosed the Phoenix Goo. After taking the prescribed medicine, I slowly began to recover. I clung to Lysander and sobbed. He was a prince of noble birth, protected by an imperial will. He could have lived a peaceful life. But for me, he had gambled everything on a desperate game. Even with a second life, even after making the Crown Prince bleed, we were still one move behind. We still hadn't won. Kalen attended to the Emperor day and night. The court and the common people all praised his filial piety, and I was like a black crow, hiding in my room. When Lysander came, I would burrow into his arms, rarely speaking. He fed me my medicine, his hand gently touching my forehead, his eyes filled with an unbearable sorrow. Leora, he murmured. We haven't lost yet. I was close to despair. It's hopeless. Kalen is a madman. He gently stroked my hair, his voice soft. The Phoenix Goo is not without a cure. I looked up stunned. What? Imperial Father is not in any mortal danger for now. He reassured me. You can rest easy. But Kalen said, don't worry. Just do what you need to do. At worst, we'll just be a pair of ill-fated lovers. He was right. The worst that could happen was dying together. I had already died once. As long as it wasn't by freezing, I had nothing to fear. The minister's daughter, now Crown Princess Rowena's son, was being held under house arrest in the East Palace. The reason was that she had tried to punish the junior consort Serafina, and had nearly caused her to miscarry. Serafina's little trick never failed. The security around the East Palace was lax. Most of the guards had likely been reassigned by Kaelin to the Imperial Palace. I slipped in without much trouble. The moment I entered, I saw Rowena kneeling on the floor, respectfully offering a cup of tea to Serafina. It was a ridiculous sight. Serafina hesitated, refusing to take it. Rowena coldly smashed the cup on the floor. A matron standing beside Serafina immediately stepped forward, ready to slap her. I appeared just in time. Serafina gasped. "How did you get in here?" "Guards." She called for the guards twice, but no one came. Her face paled with panic. I helped Rowena to her feet. Since marrying into the East Palace, she hadn't had a single day of peace. Kaelin completely ignored Serafina's bullying, not caring at all. If it weren't for the fear of implicating her family, she would have taken her own life long ago. Her despair was identical to mine in my past life. I understood her completely. "Junior consort, please accompany me to the palace." Serafina refused to go, but a few of my maids held her fast. She didn't dare struggle too much, afraid of harming the child in her womb, so she had no choice but to become my hostage. Kaelin had gone mad. If he had any weakness left, it could only be Serafina. Therefore, she had to be in my hands. I whispered a few words to Rowena. Her expression shifted from terror to steely resolve. "Don't worry. I won't let you down." I climbed into the carriage with Serafina. She let out a piercing shriek. I raised an eyebrow. "Be quiet, or I'll carve a flower on your face right now." She immediately clamped her hands over her mouth in terror. She was still a far cry from the cruel and ruthless woman she had been in our past life. "The Crown Prince will not spare you," she threatened. I ignored her, simply ordering Lyra to go faster. Compared to Kaelin, she was not worth my attention. As expected, our carriage was stopped at the palace gates. A guard blocked our path, respectfully stating, "His Majesty is gravely ill. The Crown Prince has ordered that no one is to enter the palace." Bringing Serafina was indeed the right decision. I gave Lyra a subtle signal. She understood immediately and sneered. "How bold of you. You even dare to block the carriage of the junior consort of the East Palace." "The junior consort?" "Serafina. The one with the phoenix fate. The Crown Prince's most beloved." The guard hesitated. "The junior consort is with child." Lyra snapped. I pressed the tip of my sword against Serafina's stomach. She had no choice but to stick her head out the window and say softly, "I am here to visit the Crown Prince." The guards finally dared not delay any longer. As Serafina breathed a sigh of relief, I didn't bother to tell her that the tip of my sword had just sliced through her outer robe. The Emperor's palace was swarming with patrolling guards. I noticed a familiar figure among them. The same guard who had saved me from the fire, Lyra's childhood friend. He slipped over to us. He whispered urgently, "His Majesty is in critical condition. The Crown Prince is by his bedside." My heart pounded. Was Lysander too late? It couldn't be. He had left long before I did. A cold sweat trickled down my back. That madman Kaelin, he wouldn't have directly attacked him, would he? Serafina couldn't hear their conversation, but seeing my pale face, she couldn't help but gloat. "What's wrong? In the end, His Highness still values me more, doesn't he?" I didn't even bother to look at the foolish woman. She still thought this was a fight for his affection. "Announced to the Crown Prince that the junior consort Serafina requests an audience." I ordered a eunuch, pointing towards the inner chambers. The eunuch hesitated. I glanced at Serafina and smirked. "It seems the Crown Prince doesn't value you that much after all." Serafina immediately flew into a rage. "Go," she shrieked. "If anything happens, I will plead with His Highness for you." She was even more impatient than I was, desperate to assert her dominance over me. Kaelin emerged, dressed in the formal robes of the Crown Prince. Serafina started to rush towards him to declare her position, but I held her back, pressing a dagger to her throat. She let out a terrified scream. Kaelin stared at me, his eyes fixed on my face, watching my every expression. "Leora, come here." I laughed coldly. "No need, Your Highness. If you would be so kind as to let me see His Majesty." He shook his head, his tone lazy. "I'm afraid not." "Then I'll kill her." I tightened my grip on the dagger. A thin red line appeared on Serafina's neck. She stopped screaming, her eyes filling with tears as she looked pleadingly at Kaelin. Kaelin chuckled. He took an arrow from a guard and aimed it directly at Serafina. Her face went deathly pale. The pitiful look on her face turned to one of utter terror. She trembled, her voice choked. "Your Highness." I didn't believe he would actually do it. He was just trying to scare me. But he didn't hesitate. The arrow flew, piercing straight through Serafina's leg. She screamed in agony and collapsed, blood pooling around her, soaking my shoes and the hem of my gown. I stood frozen, the dagger falling from my hand, unable to believe what I had just seen. Leora, you see, I've avenged you, Kaelin said, walking towards me step by step. In our last life, it was she who drove a wedge between us and caused me to hurt you. He knelt down and gently wiped the blood from my shoes with his handkerchief. How utterly ridiculous. Did he think this could wash away his sins? The man who had personally severed my tendons and left me to die in the cold palace now wanted to blame someone else. In his dreams. I pulled another dagger from my sleeve and, without a moment's hesitation, plunged it into Kaelin's neck. Serafina saw it clearly but said nothing to warn him. Kaelin tilted his head slightly, and the blade sank deep into his shoulder. He grabbed my wrist, his eyes blazing red as he stared at me, his voice hoarse with a hint of anger. Leora, you really want to kill me? I knew I couldn't fight him. I gave up all resistance and laughed coldly, spitting out each word. I have always wanted to kill you. Every moment I spend with you makes me sick to my stomach. Blood stained Kaelin's robes. A eunuch rushed forward to bandage his wound, but he waved him away. He looked down at me, his voice gentle. It's all right. I will make you fall in love with me again. In this life you will be my only empress. Hearing this, Serafina's face turned ashen. She crawled over to him, grabbing the hem of his robe. Your Highness, you promised to marry me. Her voice trembled, tears streaming down her face. You said I would be your only primary wife. Kaelin lazily glanced down at her. Serafina, did I promise to marry you, or your older sister? Serafina looked as if she had been struck by lightning. She collapsed to the ground, clutching her stomach. I am carrying your child, she pleaded, her voice shaking. Kaelin, you can't abandon me. This was her last resort. Kaelin looked down at her with something akin to pity. Serafina, do you still not understand? I never cared about this child, and I never cared about you. You impersonated your sister to enter the East Palace, you faked being mute, you bribed the physicians to switch out your contraceptive medicine. All of these things, I can forgive. With every word he spoke, the color drained further from Serafina's face. But I told you very clearly Leora is afraid of the cold. Prepare more charcoal and blankets for her. And yet you dared to let her freeze to death. You dared to let her die before I could see her one last time. Serafina struggled, trying to embrace him, but he flung her away. I didn't. I found it all hilarious. Kaelin, are you putting on a show of devotion? He gritted his teeth and pulled the dagger from his shoulder. Blood sprayed onto Serafina's face. She screamed and fainted on the spot. Kaelin looked at me, his voice filled with sorrow. Leora, Lysander is in my hands. As long as you agree to marry me, I will spare him. I took a deep breath. Of course, it had come to this. No need, I replied calmly. If anything happens to Prince Lysander, I will follow him in death immediately. Without a moment's delay, a flash of pain crossed Kaelin's eyes. Why? You were supposed to love only me. I lost you. He looked down at the unconscious Serafina. An impostor, he muttered, made me lose my true empress. This was an act of utter treason, but the guards standing around remained impassive, as if they hadn't heard a thing. It was clear Kaelin had this entire place under his control. He tightened his grip on my wrist and laughed softly. Wait until sunrise. I will be the new emperor. We have yet to watch the sunrise together. In that case, I hope the imperial brother finds someone else to watch it with. Do not bother my future wife. A wheelchair rolled out from the shadows. Lysander waved at me. I immediately ran to him, throwing myself into his arms. How did you get out? Excellent son. A eunuch helped the emperor out from the inner chambers. Kaelin's face changed dramatically. Imperial father, you dare to force your father to abdicate. The emperor was so enraged he coughed up blood. Kaelin shook his head slowly. It doesn't count as forcing abdication. After all, imperial father has no other choice. Lysander held me tightly, whispering, don't be afraid. I was overcome with a mix of joy and grief, tears streaming down my face. I had been ready to follow him in death. Lysander placed a kiss on my forehead. Leora, he asked softly, do you want to be the empress? I shook my head frantically. No, I just want to be with you. He chuckled and asked again, then do you want to be my empress? I stared at him, confused. Lysander placed his hands on my shoulders and slowly, steadily, stood up. Kaelin was finally, truly panicking. Forcing abdication was one thing, poisoning was another. His greatest advantage had always been the lack of competition. In the capital, the only living princes were himself and Lysander, a cripple who could not inherit the throne. That was why, even when the emperor appeared, he had remained calm. Just as he said, his father had no other choice. But now, as Lysander stood before him, Kalen's face changed completely. He was genuinely terrified. Seize them, he commanded, but not a single guard moved. The Fey generals, protect his majesty. A general in full armor led a massive contingent of soldiers into the hall, their presence overwhelming. Rowena rushed to my side. My uncle, the general, refused to enter the palace at first, saying this was treason. Thankfully, this guard testified for us. The guard she indicated scratched his head, his eyes darting towards Lyra. Lyra looked back at him, her eyes filled with pride. He was just a low-ranking guard, notable only for his exceptional lightness skill. But it was thanks to him that they had been able to escape the East Palace, right under the noses of Kalen's guards. The Crown Prince is guilty of treason. He is to be taken to the Imperial dungeons and imprisoned for life. Prince Lysander is hereby named the new Crown Prince, and will temporarily hold the mandate of heaven. The Emperor decreed. I was still in a daze. Was it over? Had I really won against Kalen, the man who held the memories of our past life? As they led him away, there was not much hatred in his eyes. He just looked at me, a deep, searching gaze. I truly regret it, he said. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have been in such a rush to seize the throne. You know it too. If I had just waited patiently, the throne would have been mine eventually. You acted so rashly it was for him, wasn't it? I coldly shattered his final, sentimental delusion. He let out a bitter laugh, a sound that was both mocking and regretful. Lysander arranged for me to be taken back to my residence to rest. He still had matters of the court to handle. The emperor was ill, and standing for so long had brought on a coughing fit. Rowena held onto my hand. I looked around at the palace walls, feeling a strange emptiness. These grand halls, would they all belong to Lysander from now on? And me, would I really have to be the empress again? I lay in bed all night, tossing and turning. The lamp in my father's study also burned through the night. At dawn, Lysander returned, bringing the chill of the morning with him. He knelt by my bed. Leora, he whispered, you still haven't answered me. I clutched the corner of my blanket. You answer me first. Why are your legs fine? Lysander chuckled softly. Because from the moment I opened my eyes in this life, I began searching for the antidote. The imperial physicians couldn't cure it because they didn't know it was a goo poison. But once you know the cause, it's not impossible to find a cure. He took off his cloak and slipped into bed with me. Or last life. Don't be so surprised. Lysander pulled me close, tucking the blanket around us. You could be reborn, so why couldn't I? He put on a pitiable expression. I laughed softly. So you just went along with it, pretending to be disabled all this time. He nodded. Your ending in our last life was too tragic. I couldn't bear it. So, I asked Imperial Father to betroth you to me. So, this marriage was something Lysander had actively sought. No wonder Kalen had been so shocked that day. My eyes stung. Kalen had mentioned an imperial will. What did it say? He stroked a lock of my hair. It said that if Kalen proved unworthy, a new heir could be chosen. So that was it. The Emperor had secretly prepared a path for Lysander all along. If it weren't for me, he could have soared to the heavens in a single step. My voice caught. So then, why did you fail? I asked, pretending not to know. Lysander gently caressed my hair and sighed. It wasn't failure. I gave up, because Kalen had you. His voice was soft, but laced with a bitter resentment. I buried my face in his chest, holding him tight. In my past life, I confined myself to a monastery, praying only for your rebirth. Fortunately, the gods heard my prayers. I couldn't imagine what his life must have been like during those years. He had watched over me, witnessed me throw everything away for Kalen. The only thing he could do was beg to marry me. He must have been prepared for my rejection. Fortunately, I had also been reborn. Fortunately, I did not fail him again. He bent his head, whispering, so, will you answer me now? I reached up and touched the light stubble on his chin, then slowly shook my head. I don't want to. Just as Lysander had said, once it was known to be a goo poison, creating an antidote was not difficult. The imperial physicians used Lysander's blood as a guide and quickly developed a cure. After taking it, the emperor's spirit and health improved dramatically. The only thing that displeased him was Lysander, once again refusing to be named crown prince. Everyone wants to be the crown prince, except for him. The emperor didn't have the heart to force him, so he could only turn to me to complain. I lowered my head, avoiding his gaze. Your Majesty, your health is still strong. Why the rush to name an heir? He sighed and shook his head. Who knows? What if I suddenly pass away one day? I was startled and immediately knelt. The emperor didn't reprimand me, only sighing softly. Yora, I know it's not that Lysander doesn't want to be crown prince. It's that you don't want to be the crown princess. I didn't dare to speak. The empress and I were childhood sweethearts. My greatest regret is that I was forced to take on so many concubines to balance the court. But Lysander is not like me. The court is stable now. He can fulfill his promise to you, one lifetime, one couple. I looked up, unable to believe my ears. The emperor helped me to my feet, his gaze as gentle as a father's. I hereby decree that from this day forward, Prince Lysander shall not take any concubines. Whether he is the crown prince or seated upon the dragon throne, he must abide by this decree. This is what he asked of me. Lysander and I were married. All the noble ladies of the capital came to the palace to see me off. Rowena and Lyra supported me on either side as I stepped into the bridal sedan. From a distance I saw Seraphina being escorted out of the palace. She limped, her hands clutching her empty abdomen. The emperor, in his mercy, had allowed her to return home, but the child in her womb had to be aborted. She, who had once been so cruel and manipulative, had ultimately chosen to save her own life. On our wedding night, Lysander gently lifted the red veil from my head. The eyes of the future emperor were red-rimmed, his voice hoarse with emotion. Leora, I waited 2 lifetimes to finally marry you. I took the initiative and pressed my lips to his, warm and soft. Many years later, Lysander ascended the throne and became emperor. I never bore him a child. The physician said my body had been damaged by the cold and I could not conceive. I took it upon myself to select several beautiful women to keep him company in the palace. The day after, when he returned from court, he immediately sent them all away. I have you. That is enough, he said. But the royal family cannot be without an heir. Lysander held my wrist, his voice gentle. Don't worry. He then ordered a selection of suitable children from the royal clan to be brought to the capital. In the end, we chose an adorable, chubby baby boy to raise as our own. Years passed. The chubby child grew into a gentle and refined young man, and I had begun to grow old. That winter, the wind was biting cold. It knocked me to the ground and I never woke up again. Lysander smiled as he arranged my funeral, handling every detail with care. Then, he took his own life to be with me. The official histories record, the virtuous Empress Gongshun passed away. Half a year later, the emperor died, following her in life and death, never to be parted. A second chance at life is worthless without the wisdom to recognize true devotion. This story teaches that love should be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. A consuming obsession that demands your sacrifice is a gilded cage. No matter how beautiful it seems, true partnership is found in quiet strength that shields you and in unwavering support that heals past scars. The most profound lesson is about choosing self-worth over blind devotion, realizing that the greatest power lies in walking away from what breaks you to embrace what finally makes you whole. And that's the end of our story. Thank you for joining Red Lantern Audio. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to support the channel. Have a wonderful day.